and welcome back to Read Becca for yet another chatty catch up on my week of reading. And we've got a lot, as always. Mostly what I finished last weekend is what I've got to talk about. Everything else, I was feeling very slumpy. I was really struggling to read this week. And so, as often happens, I just started new things. So I have a ton that's on the go that I've read a little bit in, where I'm trying to progress and really slowly doing that. So it's a pile, as always. So first, on audio, I read The Atmospherians by McElroy. And you can kind of see, I don't think this is really going to come through, but it's like a phone screen with water on it and a picture of a lake. It's very cool and relevant to the story, but I won't tell you how. So this is an interesting and really over-the-top satirical novel. Early on, when it was feeling very balanced, it felt a lot like The Sellout to me, and I was like, oh, this could be like really, really good. But it just never became cohesive enough for me. That was my main one big gripe. But what this is about a cult. So we're following a character, Sasha, who was like a wellness vlogger, influencer type, who is now completely canceled, basically, because she snapped at one of her fans who had been literally harassing her for a long time. And she finally snapped, and as a result, this guy responded by killing himself. So that is a present topic in this story. So if you have any triggers for that, I would say stay away from it. There's quite a bit of violence, not too graphic, but there is through the entire book. Very, very graphic eating disorder depiction. So if you are going into this, you should know, like, literally every chapter there's some graphic depiction of eating disorder. So she's this influencer who has been disgraced and canceled. She's holed up in her apartment, hiding out, trying to figure out what she's gonna do next because her whole life has been ruined. She can't go outside without people shaming her over this. And her best friend, Dyson, calls her and says, we're gonna start a cult. And so my thought when my best friend tells me we're gonna start a cult, I would want to get them mental help. But she does not do that. She goes along with it. She kind of meets up with him and is like, okay, what do you mean by this? Are you joking? And then, he kind of unfurls the plan. We're gonna get these men. They're really toxic men, and we're gonna rehabilitate them at this cabin in the woods that's isolated, and we're gonna have a cult, and we're gonna fix things. Now that's important because in this world, it's sometimes quasi-contemporary. There's this weird speculative element, man hordes, and so I think we needed the man hordes? Probably not. But it could have, if we had stayed focused on the toxic masculinity element, it would have probably really worked. However, what's happening with these man hordes is that a thing has started happening in society where men just sort of randomly lose control of themselves and come into groups and do random manly things. That could be anything from like changing a tire. Usually the person doesn't want their tire changed and can't stop these men from doing it, but they do it anyway. And sometimes it's really damaging and harmful things. So it's not good in either case. But society doesn't know what to do about it. So Dyson's plan is this really big, grandiose thing where this cult that he's calling the Atmosphere is going to solve this problem for society that's being caused by toxic men. And so Sasha's kind of like, okay, and goes along, and they head up to this cabin in the woods. They start planning. Eventually these guys show up, and they all really suck. And they're all very much like incel, red pill, MRA, like men's rights activists. So these are all sort of extreme, very extreme end type of incel, I think, is probably in the common vernacular at this point because we've had so many violent attacks from men who were self-proclaimed incels or involved with incel groups. The other two terms, MRA and red pill, are kind of in the shared Venn diagram or steps along the path to being an incel. But so we've got very extreme misogyny and toxicity there. And they're basically just trying to make it up as they go along. Dyson clearly had plans, but they're very much figuring it out as they go. So I wish it had stayed much more focused on this cult element and them sort of figuring it out. It doesn't, unfortunately, for me anyway. We also are jumping backwards. We're getting Sasha's start as an influencer and how that led up to her being disgraced. We get the entire backstory from childhood of Sasha and Dyson's relationship and friendship, and how his relationship with her played into her role as an influencer. We are then also getting her being pursued by a social media company, and her being this person who's in demand and kind of in popular circles, that sort of thing. And then we're, coming back and talking about the cult a bit, but there's not a ton of progression with the cult story. So it almost felt like that went by the wayside to do all this other stuff. So I felt like it needed to pick a lane and stay with that for about the first half. I was thinking this could be something really good. Mentally, I was really comparing it to The Sellout by Paul Beatty. And I think, it had promise there. So I don't want to totally knock this. This was batshit crazy, and I liked it for that. I thought it was really compelling to read, but it needed to narrow its focus into something really cohesive. And I think in the end, we did wind up with this message surrounding narcissism, because we're just getting bombarded with people who are utter narcissists. So if you don't like narcissistic characters, you will not get along with anyone here. So I do think that was where we ended up. I also think it kind of undercut itself because we pretty much end the novel in a different perspective all of a sudden. We get the whole story from Sasha's perspective up until this end thing that's a very random sort of head jump. And I feel like the reader necessarily, but the author may have thought that we needed to be outside of Sasha's perspective to have a step back from being inside her head, because we do get so attached to her as a character over the course of this. At least starting out, she's very sympathetic. Like, I got behind her almost immediately, and then slowly over the course of things, it's kind of like, well, she is not quite self-aware of what she's doing, is she? And that really does play out over the course of the story. So yeah, I think there's a breadcrumb trail there, but yeah, I wish it had been much more focused. So this was one I enjoyed, and I definitely would try more from the author. And then I have one that is probably going to be a shocker to a few people. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So I picked this up basically because Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads, as always, mentioned Emily St. John Mandel for one of her newer books, and I was like, I need to get to that. This was on my TBR last year for my physical TBR shelf, and I didn't get to it. I'm probably the last person in the world to read this, and it was okay. I feel like I was maybe a victim of the hype. I was expecting so much, and I've heard a lot of things. Like, everyone seems to talk about how it's this hopeful caravan of performers, and it's that technically, in parts, about half of it is, but it's really not that hopeful. That part is pretty much just as bleak as most post-apocalyptic stories. So I think what this is doing is really interesting in the framing. I did appreciate that. So this whole, if you somehow are the next person beyond me who hasn't read this and you don't know what the plot is, the framing is that we start with a performance of King Lear right before a pandemic happens. And that night, a man dies of a heart attack, not related to the pandemic at all. The man performing as King Lear dies on stage, and we are getting this story both like 20 years before and 20 years after, centering around people who were there or were connected to this actor. And I think that was an interesting way to tell this. There's sort of just a random collection of people, from people in the crowd who rushed up to try and do CPR, that sort of thing. So like we have an EMT and a doctor, people who were there on stage with him, people he was married to previously, that sort of thing. So we're getting all these people who have a bunch of random connections to him, and then over the story we're finding out there are interconnections between them. So that's interesting. The whole past part about him, I hated. Like, I just did not have any interest at all in. Basically, we get him coming up as a struggling actor from Canada into, you know, becoming famous and having lots of wives and paparazzi and all that. Like, I did not care about the actor drama. Like, it was ridiculous. I don't care about the gossip. And that's like all that part was. So that was half of the book, basically. I was really interested in the doctor and the EMT that rushed up. Their stories were great in the before and as the pandemic was breaking. Those were very interesting. But they were basically just standard pandemic novels, which we have so much of. And then the after, so we're following about 20 years after, it's again, all feels like a standard post-apocalyptic novel. Everywhere this troupe of performers show up, they're being met with guns for the most part. Yes, people who recognize them and remember them are great and welcoming, but a whole lot of the places where there's become some sort of civilization, it's a little crazy pants. So yeah, it didn't really seem to stand out that much from stuff I've read now, but I don't know how much of that has been inspired by this or come after this, because there just are so many good pandemic novels now to read. I kept thinking of like Blindness. I read that, and that's much older than this, obviously. And that was such an innovative take. It has a lot of the same core feelings that this does, but I felt like it did a lot of things better. So for me, this was very much just okay, and yeah, it didn't live up to the hype, unfortunately. And then the last one that I have is one I can't talk about. It's Disquiet by Zulfu Livanalli and translated by Brendan Freely from Turkish. And this one is a story of basically just a short book about a journalist who hears about a childhood friend of his who has been killed in a hate crime, basically, against him as a Muslim. And so this journalist returns back to his home to uncover the story, and starts checking in with refugees and whatnot to find out what happened to his friend before he died. And so that's pretty much the whole of the plot. But I can't talk too much about this or my feelings until the BookTube Prize is announced. This is the finals, so you will get my feelings when my wrap-up comes out early October. And that is what I read. I read those 3 things. Now, my big pile. The very big pile. Oh dear. So, on audio, I'm working on The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. And this is kind of gothic-y, very atmospheric. I spent a bunch of time at the park today, so I got a ton of the audiobook listened to and really enjoying it. It is very low plot, though. So that is a big one off of my TBR shelf. And then Maria. So this has, after I picked it up, been shortlisted or longlisted for the National Book Award. So that's exciting. I did think this was probably back of the list, but because I was feeling so slumpy, I just grabbed this and read the first story, Brujeria for Beginners, and I really enjoyed it. It pretty much just ran right along as I was reading because it's so interesting in terms of the form, if not the story. The story was a little like, that's fine. It's like a single-sided perspective or dialogue from the professor of this class for Brujeria for Beginners, discussing all their items that they've collected for their kids and like the basics of magic. So I thought that was really interesting. There are gaps in between for when the students are talking, but obviously you can't tell what they're saying. So it's just interesting and very quick to read. So we'll be very curious to continue picking this one up. Then I have The Queens of Innis Lear by Tessa Gratton. Yeah, this is the how do you eat the elephant thing one bite at a time. I am really slowly getting through this. I sat down and read for a lot of time, but I didn't make a ton of progress. I'm still under 100 pages, but I'm progressing, and I think today I finally busted through and like actually caught some threads on this one, and I'm moving forward a little better now. And my pile is going to fall. Okay, and we've still got more books. So then I have Real World by Natsuo Kirino, and this is translated Japanese thriller. Yeah, I can't really say anything about it yet. I'm very briefly into this, but I am actually chugging along on it, so that's really good. Then we have Keah Brown's The Pretty One. This is a collection of essays. I am still just slowly reading one essay at a time, so I'm a little over halfway. And finally, after I'm done with this, I'm going to jump into The Employees by Olga Ravn. And this is another like translated anti-corporate type of work, I think. So I'm really curious to get into it, and it's a shorty, and I didn't even notice until I was flipping through before I sat down. It's got like a lot of white space, so I think I'm gonna fly through this one too. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I really need something I fly through. So that is it for my reading. In terms of everything else, I think the only real thing to mention is the weather. It has finally become a little bit autumnal, a major temperature drop, and it went from literally like 100 to mid 70s in one day, and it's been great. It's been really cooling down overnight, which is not usual when you live in a place that's very humid. So we suddenly are kind of still warm, but really cooling down overnight, so that's been fabulous. And today is a little warmer. We're kind of back in summer-y temperatures in the mid 80s, but it's still been very pleasant. I just shut the windows and turned on the AC for poor Cinnamon. Otherwise, I would still have the windows open, but he overheats way too easy. Yeah, otherwise, I don't think I have anything major. I did spend a huge part of my week battling wasps, so that was interesting. I haven't had to deal with that before, but my front porch light is installed kind of weird in that clearly the siding was cut out in a square, but the actual light that attaches to the wall is round. And so there's like a little wedge that's a slight opening on one side. And so the wasps, I realized, were coming and going from there increasingly. So I tried desperately to do it kind of the natural way and just say, hey guys, leave, please, despite them being evil wasps. And so I tried a bunch of garlic solutions, because garlic is not something that wasps or bees like. And so I went through actual garlic cloves. I went through some garlic powder, some garlic paste. None of it worked at all. They even fully removed, this is my ridiculous solution. I had a skewer with garlic cloves and kind of like stuck it in there to block them. And they removed 3 garlic cloves off of this skewer. And they're supposed to not really like this, to the point that it feels like burny on them when they touch it. So they were willing to fight the garlic in order to continue living behind my porch light. So unfortunately, I really was unhappy that I had to get some wasp spray and finally just take the nuclear option. But there are no more wasps, thankfully. So now I'm just waiting. I have kept the light off there and tried to make sure all bugs are away. So I'm going to take it apart perhaps later today and try to clear everything out, whatever's in there still. Yeah, hopefully everything is gone. We'll see. If I don't return next week, it's because I got wasped. So I think that's all for me today. And sadly, I don't have any recommendations this week. I know I should. I missed multiple days of watching videos, so I have like 400 things in my queue. And I know I have seen a couple things that warranted recommending, but I just was so brain dead that I failed to write down anything. I will get caught up, and then I eventually will start remembering or noting down new things. So we will have more recommendations next week. So I think that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I just got done at the gym on September 21st. It's 100 degrees outside. Cinnamon doesn't appreciate Rue's attempts to groom his ear. That's a lot of fluff, Rue. A bookshelf cat? Ah, the cat tree finally has fruit. Now that the window is open to look out of. Good stuff, guys? Yeah.